So welcome to our Southwest Alberta Groundwater Project launch. It's our first official event, first webinar for the project. So we're really excited and thank you for joining us. We had over 170 people registered. So there's obviously a lot of interest in groundwater, which is really good to see. And we will be sharing the recording. So a lot of people will probably be watching it after who couldn't make it. As I mentioned, you can turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded. My name is Shannon Frank. If you don't know me, I'm the executive director of the Oldman Watershed Council based in Lethbridge or Sikokatoki. And I'm the co-host for the event today. The other co-host is Maggie Finkle-Aucoin with the Living Lakes Canada. And she's going to be presenting later today, so you'll hear lots from her. And I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that the land we're joining from is the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi people of Sitsigaitsitapi. And our collective prosperity comes from this land. And we need to remember that the Blackfoot people have been stewarding it since time immemorial, and we have a lot to learn from them. And they're still here today teaching us and welcoming us to their land. We've been really honored to learn from many friends and neighbors like Api Sumaka and Nina Pixie and Randall Wolftail, who have guided us on our journey of reconciliation and really are teaching us how to live lightly on the land and leave a healthy watershed for future generations. So I want to thank them and all of our Niitsitapi neighbors. We have a question and answer period at the end, so please save your questions for then. If you have a question, also please put it in the chat if you prefer, and we'll be able to answer them from the chat. So yeah, we're really excited about launching this project today. It's really been only a short turnaround. We started this only a few months ago, believe it or not, after Kat Hartwig and I, the executive director of Living Lakes Canada, spoke on the phone about the importance of groundwater and how we've done some previous studies, but we really knew there was some data gaps that needed to be filled. So Living Lakes Canada has been a tremendous partner. They really jumped right in and got this project going. And so I really want to recognize them. Maggie's here presenting, but there's also folks that have helped, but Braden, Emily, Siobhan, and many others at Living Lakes. So I want to recognize them for their support and really helping us get this going. It's been a really positive partnership for us. I also want to thank the technical committee who's helping advise on the project, and you'll get to know them a bit later. And Noreen Plain Eagle from Piikani Nation Lands Management, I want to thank for being a partner as well. So a very brief overview for the webinar. We're going to give you a bit of OWC's role in the groundwater project, just to let you know where we're coming from. And then we have 3 fascinating presentations, all focused on groundwater. So the first one is going to be from Maggie, talking about this new critical project we're launching, what we're planning to do in the next couple of years, and the progress we've made so far. Then we're going to have Cathy Ryan, from a professor from the University of Calgary, speak about groundwater in Alberta and kind of the state of things provincially. And then we'll have Jeff Gutsell with Environment and Protected Areas, based out of the Oldman Watershed, speaking about the specific situation here in the Southwest. So these are going to be really valuable presentations, and I want to thank them in advance, and I'll thank you again after. So as I mentioned, there will be a question and answer period at the end. So please save your questions for then and or put them in the chat, your choice, and we'll be happy to have lots of time for that. Again, just for those joining, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared after the event, along with some links and resources. If your call is dropped for any reason and you're having issues technically, just leave the Zoom call and try and log back in with the same link. I know sometimes there's technical challenges, so hopefully that works. Everyone has a personalized link. I think that's all the housekeeping items. Am I missing anything, Maggie? Perfect. Okay, so we're gonna jump right in.
At one point, I wanted to say that.
And if everybody could just mute yourself as well, that would be perfect for the presentations, and then we can unmute after for the question and answer period. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to jump into a little overview of the OWC's role. So the Oldman Watershed Council is a nonprofit based in Secaucus or Lethbridge, and we're a forum for all voices. And so our role is to bring people together from all sectors and work on solutions to the challenges that are facing all of us. You know, we all depend on this watershed and we need to work together on those solutions. And so one of our roles is to assess the health of our watershed and see, you know, where are we actually at in terms of our water quality, our water quantity, and our habitat. And so in our last 2010 State of the Watershed report, groundwater was identified as one of the areas where there's gaps and, you know, more monitoring is needed. And so since then, we've been trying to help fill some of those gaps, and we've done 3 different groundwater studies. And in there, you know, we looked at aquifers and water balance, how much is being used versus how much is available at a very high level based on what data we could get. And we also recommended some monitoring sites. And so we're really excited through this new project, we'll actually be able to do some new monitoring. And Maggie will get into that next. And we're really excited about having the opportunity to fill some of those data gaps and have increased well monitoring. Our goal is basically just to increase groundwater knowledge and data sharing, and so that the resource, this very important water resource, can be managed wisely. And you know, we know we're facing climate change, extreme weather, drought. The last few years has been very extreme. And you know, we live in a semi-arid climate. This is not unexpected. We've had long-term droughts before, and with the rising population, we need access to water, and we need to know what our resource looks like. So, you know, we just want to see that wise management and help fill those gaps. So now we'll have Maggie present. So Maggie Finkle-Aucoin is the GIS, or Geographic Information Systems and Database Manager with Living Lakes Canada. And she's really become kind of the project lead for this project from LLC, coordinating many of the different pieces of the puzzle that makes these projects work, and, you know, getting in there and making sure things get done. So I really appreciate Maggie's help, and she's actually joining us from PEI. And so she's very dedicated and, you know, putting in the early hours when it's much later out there. So I appreciate you being so accommodating. And so she's going to give us a project overview and some of the progress that we've made so far.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, so bear with me while I get that set up. Right, perfect. So thank you again, Shannon, for the really lovely intro. I'm very excited to be able to chat with you guys today and introduce the project. Shannon, thank you again for the land acknowledgement. I want to just acknowledge that Living Lakes Canada, our water stewardship work originated in the unceded traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, the Lheidli, Secwépemc, the Snakes, and the Silks Nation, who have stewarded these lands for generations. And by acknowledging this and, the fact that the project that we'll be talking about today that takes place on Treaty 7 territory, this means that we understand the role and responsibility that these Indigenous peoples have to the lands and waters in the Oldman Watershed and also through the Columbia Basin where our work originates, and that we aim to align all of our water stewardship work with their water priorities. As Shannon already mentioned, I am the program manager for the Southwest Alberta Groundwater Project, as well as Living Lakes Canada's GIS and database manager. I am lucky to call Prince Edward Island, or Abequit, home, which is the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'm just going to get right into it. So today I'll be giving you a little bit of a background on Living Lakes Canada, some of our history in groundwater monitoring work, as well as introducing the project. So for a little bit of background on Living Lakes Canada, we are an award-winning water science and stewardship NGO with more than 20 years of experience working with Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to protect fresh water. Our mission is to facilitate collaboration in science, education, monitoring, and restoration and policy development for the long-term protection of Canada's lakes, rivers, wetlands, and watersheds. And our science-based programs are typically aligned with provincial and federal monitoring programs, and we deliver water monitoring training, courses, as well as educational programs to enhance community stewardship capacity and promote water literacy and encourage a water conservation ethic. So at LLC, we believe in empowering communities to monitor their own local watersheds. So with that in mind, we have developed and operate a coordinated hydroclimatic water monitoring network in southeastern BC, also known as the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework. As a part of this framework, we run the Columbia Basin Groundwater Monitoring Program. And both these projects are complemented by the Columbia Basin Water Hub, which is a robust data sharing platform that makes water data available to researchers, decision makers, and the public. So together, these projects support informed management of the transboundary Columbia River watershed, and they are replicable and scalable platforms that aim to build capacity to collect reliable freshwater data and to inform water management and resource allocation and planning freshwater resources as we see freshwater resources grow increasingly scarce, mostly due to climate change. So with that said, I do want to take a moment to highlight the importance of groundwater monitoring and then provide a detailed overview of the Columbia Basin Groundwater Monitoring Program, since this is what's going to serve as the foundation for the project that we're planning on implementing here within Alberta. So groundwater is a crucial freshwater source for domestic, agriculture, and industrial and commercial purposes, and it's connected to surface water and helps maintain water levels in wetlands, streams, rivers, lakes. Cathy Rhyme will be giving us a bit more of a detailed overview of the importance of groundwater later on, but in essence, it is really essential for maintaining healthy ecosystems, including habitat for fish, waterfowl, and wildlife. And careful management and allocation of groundwater is becoming increasingly important as populations continue to grow, as we see demand increase, and pressures such as climate change intensify. And when it comes to fresh water, and especially groundwater, the expression "you can't manage what you don't measure" is really relevant. So in 2013, the District of Invermere was working on their groundwater protection plan. And at that time, it was realized that there was a lack of groundwater information and a need to educate the public and engage community. So in recognizing that need, Living Lakes Canada began to create a network of groundwater wells to increase groundwater level data to not only help support Invermere's groundwater protection plan, but expand monitoring throughout the basin. This would support sustainable water management in other communities and hopefully increase public awareness of groundwater issues. And this initiative eventually became the Columbia Basin Groundwater Monitoring Program. This program has three main objectives. One, collect data and track groundwater levels to help understand seasonal and long-term trends. Two, increase groundwater knowledge. So Using tools like outreach, education, and community engagement, we wanted to involve locals in the water stewardship process and help build up their capacity to advocate for responsible water management practices. And 3, we wanted to share the data for publicly for others to use. So in our case, in the Columbia Basin, that means sharing the data on the Columbia Basin Water Hub, where it's accessible not only to the public, but also available for decision makers and researchers to make use of that data. So the way that this program works and how we've implemented in the Columbia Basin is that through community engagement with municipalities, First Nations, private well owners, we identify existing wells to monitor, and we refer to these as our volunteer observation wells. They are typically inactive supply wells that are not currently being pumped. And this engagement process can look like webinars such as this one, media outreach. We've delivered multiple groundwater surveys, etc. And once an observation well has then been identified through a combination of both scientific parameters and then also community need, we establish a partnership with the well owner and install groundwater level loggers. From there, we perform regular site visits throughout the year to both collect the data and ensure the functionality of the equipment and address any other site issues. Then that data is widely shared on the Columbia Basin Water Hub to ensure that the data is easily accessible and available to those who need it most. This is all a community-based approach that acts really similarly to the British Columbia's Provincial Groundwater Observation Well Network. And our aim with the program was to complement the pre-existing BC Provincial Groundwater Observation Well Network, or P.Geolg is the shorthand for it. Because although there were over 230 active observation wells in the British Columbia Provincial Network, there were actually only 6 observation wells at the time in the Columbia Basin. That number has since gone up to 8 provincially run wells. But the Living Lakes Canada program has managed to establish and is currently monitoring 32 volunteer observation wells, which has led to a 425% increase in groundwater monitoring across the basin region. So as mentioned, an important objective of this project is to not only monitor these wells and collect additional data, but it is to build up water and data literacy amongst the community. So here are just a couple of ways that we're achieving this goal. So by increasing the available data and making it available for community use, we engage community and we respond to requests. Those requests look like, attending town halls, speaking at multiple events. We provide employment and experience to early career professionals and hydrology technicians. We engage well owners and volunteers in monitoring. We host labs for college students, and we also facilitate community outreach through newsletters, social media, etc. As well, Living Lakes Canada recently released our first Watershed bulletin in a series that aims to share water-related data that we collect in the Canadian Columbia Basin. And the first issue focuses on data from our groundwater program. And if you would like to check it out, you'll see the link to that up here shortly in the chat. Again, another big portion of this project is community engagement. So many of the well owners who participate in the program, which is sometimes municipal staff, First Nations, and private landowners, they also are engaged in the data collection process. So at over 50% of our site visits in 2022 and 2023, well owners and water system operators or volunteers were on site. And as many of our wells are equipped with Bluetooth data loggers, about 50% of our well owners will also download the data periodically between site visits and send that data to us. And then they also have access to that real-time data themselves as well. The program also engages with students throughout the Columbia Basin. So in 2023, we hosted 9 student groundwater labs that provided 141 students from Selkirk College and the College of the Rockies with hands-on experience while monitoring equipment and applying groundwater concepts to real-world scenarios. And for us, it is really important to remember that our monitoring work has real-world implications. So it doesn't just start and end with the data collection. So we have many examples that showcase the value of our groundwater data being applied in real world. So for instance, The village of Canal Flats has benefited from the groundwater data that we collect, as we've established a well in the town site. And they have not only used it as a valuable source of knowledge for examining their trends, but they also have been able to provide that data and information to third parties, such as SNC Lavalin, for determining groundwater at risk of containing pathogens for the Health and Protection branch of the BC Ministry of Health. We also have a quote up here from Genevieve Pomerleau. So we have heard from consultants such as her about the usefulness of the data that we are able to collect with the program. And the quality of the data is reflected in its integration into reports such as the classification of groundwater response mechanisms and the provincial observation wells across British Columbia, which was a report that was produced by Simon Fraser University and the province of British Columbia. So seeing our data used in real world scenarios is definitely very rewarding. And all of this work has led to a successful program, which has earned us a BC Achievements Foundation Community Award, as well as a Mitchell Award of Distinction, but also a Canadian Open Data Society Award in 2023 for data quality. So on the back of the success, we began conversations with Oldman Watershed Council, as Shannon mentioned earlier, to help address the dire need for groundwater monitoring in Alberta. So by sharing our learnings and applying them to support water security in the Oldman Watershed. Some 600,000 rural Albertans depend on groundwater. And meanwhile, the groundwater levels that we see in parts of Alberta have reached record lows. For example, wells in Rocky View County, just outside of Calgary, show steady declines with the lowest levels ever measured. These drastic water supply shortages that are impacting Alberta have resulted in historical water sharing agreements to reduce water usage that cover each of the subbasins of the Red Deer River, the Bow River, and the main stem of the Oldman River and the upper tributaries. And we don't need to tell you folks that the Oldman watershed, many communities are experiencing severely low water levels. A lack of understanding of groundwater system is also a challenge. And as we previously discussed, directly providing relevant groundwater data to communities can inform watershed management, responsible use, and new policies ensuring access to clean and sufficient water for communities and ecosystems. And as we see an increase in droughts, floods, wildfires, and lake temperatures, all things that we're experiencing immediately at this time, communities will continue to increasingly explore how to adapt to these changes and mitigate drought and climate change risk. And the water data that we could collect from this program will have an important role to play to inform this process. So just to show you this graph here on the screen, the government of Alberta currently operates 306 groundwater observation wells, and we'll have Jeff Gutsell speak to this work a little bit later on. I did just want to draw some comparison that the province of British Columbia operates 516 wells, while Manitoba currently operates over 850. So this highlights a gap in monitoring efforts, which underscores the urgent need for more comprehensive data collection to make informed decisions regarding groundwater management. In fact, recent findings from Alberta's Auditor General showed that the province needs to improve the ways it manages and monitors water. Oh, sorry. So by recognizing this need, Living Lakes Canada is ready to step in and fill this data collection gap by implementing this project, which will hopefully enhance groundwater monitoring, engage communities to improve groundwater awareness, and ensure sustainable water management. So now we'll get into a little bit of the overview of the project. So we're working in partnership with the Oldman Watershed Council, and we will develop and implement a framework for an enhanced groundwater monitoring network to fill the current data gaps on critical aquifers. So this project will be piloted in the Oldman River Watershed with the support of Oldman River Watershed Council, as well as the Piikani Nation Lands Department. And we aim to eventually expand this throughout the rest of southwestern Alberta, eventually all southern Alberta, and big picture, big dreams throughout Alberta. And the project will apply innovative geoscanning technology to help identify potential aquifers quickly and cost effectively and assist in the development of this monitoring network. And the overarching goal is to openly and publicly share the collected data to support sustainable water management practices in all of the people and wildlife in Alberta. So step one will be to identify under-monitored and at-risk aquifers. So we'll be carrying out an aquifer vulnerability assessment in the Oldman Watershed. So as a side note, for those of you that are wondering what exactly is an aquifer, it's a body of rock and or sediment that holds groundwater in the simplest terms. The aquifer vulnerability assessment and its corresponding data gap analysis will be completed in the fall of 2024. And this will assess the current network of groundwater monitoring wells, as well as groundwater licenses, the geology, connection to surface springs, and biogeoclimatic zones within the watershed to rank them by priority for monitoring is the hopeful goal. And this assessment itself will be valuable for decision-making as it will be made available to inform water licensing and well development to identify surface water to groundwater connections where possible. Next will be the site selection process. So identifying locations for volunteer observation wells will be based on community concerns and priorities gathered through a public engagement process, and then will be combined with the data gap analysis and the risks identified in the vulnerability assessment. So this is going to be done similarly to the site selection process that we have for our water monitoring framework. And we use something called the priority monitoring matrix. And this is a tool that we developed to shortlist monitoring sites while balancing a community and scientific need. So then once that shortlist is made, the final site selection will be done in collaboration with Oldman Watershed Council, the Gutsell Nation Lands Department, and the participating communities to ensure that their concerns and priorities are being met by the initiative. At this time, we are currently planning for 3 observation wells to be outfitted with monitoring equipment in the spring of 2025, with the hopes to eventually be able to install more. But they will be equipped with a groundwater depth and temperature probe. And the data collection will be adhering to provincial protocols and best practices, and it will begin as soon as the ground thaws. So during the summer of 2025, that equipment will be installed, and then we will begin training for local volunteers and technicians to be able to build up capacity within the community to monitor these wells themselves. A unique aspect of the project that we're initiating here in Alberta that stands out from our Columbia Basin model is the integration of TTEM technology. So BGC Engineering is, or has been, an established partner of the project since the beginning. And they are the only company in Canada currently licensed to operate the TTEM technology, which stands for Towed Transient Electromagnetics. It can collect up to 50,000 sounding points per day, which results in a cross-section of electrical resistivity to a depth of approximately 100 meters below subsurface and a distance of up to 60 kilometers, or basically as far as a quad or snowmobile can drive in a day. So in this picture here, you see a bit of a rig attached up, something that looks like a kitchen sink, but basically that entire device is pulled across the land using a quad or ATV and gathers very rapidly, scans the ground very rapidly. So it is a system that is cost effective. It scans a large area on the ground, and it can provide really detailed images that are similar to airborne surveys, but with a much higher image resolution. So they're really good at capturing complex geological formations below the ground. We'll be integrating this data that is provided by the TTEM into our aquifer vulnerability assessment, as well as our data gap analysis, and then we'll be able to use it to ground truth well reports and potentially provide communities with data that can help identify potential groundwater sources for more effective well drilling. So to go into the volunteer observation wells a little bit more, you'll see on the screen here an example of what the data that we collect looks like coming out of the ground. And in this case, that was a well that we've monitored since 2018. But they will collect hourly groundwater level measurements to determine how levels are changing seasonally as well as from year to year. And that data can then be used to analyze and forecast water level trends, monitor changes in groundwater and recharge storage, monitor the effects of climate variability and groundwater withdrawals, and understand groundwater surface water interactions. And then, of course, all of that can help inform water management decisions and hopefully guide conservation actions. So then as we get into the reporting and hopefully the expansion stage in the fall of 2025, our project learnings and best practices will be synthesized into a final report, and we'll present, there will be a presentation that will deliver in person in both Calgary and Lethbridge to representatives within the Bow River Basin Council, the Oldman Watershed Council, as well as the Piikani Nation Lands Department. So community outreach will also take place throughout the duration of this project via newsletter, press releases to local media, social media, and public webinars such as this one to engage all of you folks here, as well as the public, to raise awareness and education about the community-based groundwater monitoring. In the next 3 to 5 years, as we expand the project outside of the Oldman watershed, we anticipate that the number of volunteer observation wells will continue to grow, and they'll hopefully contribute to a significant increase in monitoring and groundwater data collected within the province of Alberta. And then with that data, the project will make the data available by storing it on an open database so that it's readily accessible by decision makers, because we really do believe that through informed water policy and water management decisions that the groundwater can be protected and available for current and future generations. To touch on a little bit of the project management, this is definitely a collaborative effort. So Living Lakes Canada is going to be managing the project, but it's supported by the Oldman Watershed Council as well as the Piikani Nation Lands Department. So our expertise is in building and establishing robust hydrological monitoring networks, primarily in data poor regions, and it positions us well to help support this project. And our extensive network of partners, stakeholders, and community connections enable us to mobilize knowledge and project outcomes effectively, ensuring that the project can be efficiently scaled up to a province-wide scope. Oldman Watershed Council will be coordinating on the ground monitoring work, as well as facilitating connections between the local partnering organizations. And we have also assembled a technical advisory committee to support the project and address scientific concerns. So we will meet with them regularly so they can remain up to date on the project and weigh in where necessary. And then finally, we do have Bow River Basin Council, as well as, again, Oldman Watershed Council to help host and coordinate the presentations on project learnings in Calgary and Lethbridge, respectively. Shannon had mentioned this project has really hit the ground running. So we're already kind of in the beginning stages of doing some field work. So some work that's already been done is that in April of 2024, we went out and visited the Piikani Nation lands along with BGC Engineering to tour possible well sites and also better understand their critical water concerns and identify areas to pilot the use of the TTEM technology. The data was then actually collected by BGC already in June, and they'll be presenting these results in the coming weeks. So once those results have been presented, they'll be incorporated into the vulnerability assessments and the data gap analysis. And as I mentioned, we view the TTEM technology as quite powerful because it will be helpful for the nation to enable them to better understand their groundwater situation and inform any future well drilling that they plan on conducting on their lands. Finally, we're also in the stages of outreach and engagement. So outreach to local community water stewardship groups is underway, and we have begun building connections and relationships with organizations such as the Bow River Basin Council, CPAWS in Alberta, Trout Unlimited, and the Mistakis Institute to better understand their water concerns and ongoing work in the region. So to achieve our project outcomes, we want to use the most coordinated and efficient approach. So we're committed to understanding other groundwater initiatives and working collaboratively with additional partners to ensure a cohesive monitoring across the province. And by doing so, we do aim to eliminate duplication of efforts and foster a cooperative approach to our stewardship. This commitment to collaboration enhances our ability to address water concerns effectively and sustainably. Now, I know that was a lot of information, but I want to give you all a heartfelt thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to be kicking off this project, and we really look forward to keeping you all up to date. So following this webinar, we have a QR code, so feel free to follow us on social media. But you will be receiving an email following this webinar with a recording as well as some additional resources. And you'll have an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter at that time. And I do encourage you all to do so that you can remain up to date with the project, as there will be lots happening in the coming months. So thank you all so much. And I will, with that, hand it back over to Shannon.
Awesome. Thanks, Maggie. That was a really good overview of what we're up to, and hopefully answered a lot of people's questions. And I think also you can see, you know, how much Living Lakes Canada has been able to accomplish in the Columbia Basin, and why we're so excited to do something similar here. So they really are making a big difference there. So thanks, Maggie. Okay, next up we have Dr. Cathy Ryan, from a professor from the University of Calgary. She's also a member of our technical committee and so is advising on the project. And I've known Cathy for quite a few years. She actually helped advise on one of our past groundwater studies in the Orton area, south of Fort Macleod, with some isotope analysis. So thanks, Cathy, for all your help over the years and sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks, Sharon. Everything looked good and sound good from your side?
Yep, perfect.
Shannon, I know you're Shannon.
That's okay.
Okay, well, I can't tell you how much it warms my heart to see so many people here interested in groundwater. And I really think your interest and Oldman Watershed Council and Living Lakes Canada's energy in organizing this project and this seminar are well spent. So really glad to be here, and glad that you're here too. So I wanted to just start not with necessarily an additional formal acknowledgement, but I want to make the point that water right now for First Nations is disproportionately groundwater dependent. And I'll tell you later on in this webinar that we don't really have a very good idea of how many people in Alberta or in any of the jurisdictions in Canada or in Canada as a whole rely on groundwater with time, and nor do we have rely on groundwater, and nor do we have a very good understanding of how that's changing with time. And so Indigenous communities have an unusually problematic water supply issue, and that is because if I put the reserves on this, they would be tiny compared to their traditional territories. And I think it's fair to say that much of their traditional life and migration patterns revolved around year-round water sources. So that's the lack of that traditional territory is, I think, fundamental to the problem that we need to address today. Okay, so starting probably at grade 5, as a refresher for those who don't work and think about groundwater nearly as much as I do, that in the world water supply, it's a cycle. We only have so much water to manage as we see fit. Almost all of the water is in the oceans, and of the fresh water, 2.5% of all water is fresh water. In the fresh water, that the usable groundwater is mainly, the usable fresh water is mainly groundwater, because snow and ice, although we get more and more of the snow and ice into our water cycle with time, is not available for water supply. And I might rant a little bit today or comment that so much of our time and energy goes into lakes and rivers, but really that's a small fraction of the usable groundwater, usable fresh water. And that the kind of attention that we are giving groundwater today is well deserved. And so you also, maybe in grade 5, maybe in grade 7, you heard about the water cycle, where water is evaporated from the ocean. In our case, most of it comes from the Pacific Ocean, crosses over Vancouver, it rains out. And so in terms of precipitation, we get less and less as you come over the continental divide. And here we are in on the east side of the Rockies, and we have still less. So these mountains are important water towers, and I'll tell you later that I think that they should be called mountain groundwater towers. So in our case, the groundwater flows east from the Rockies, but here you see it discharges into streams, into springs, into storage, and provides the stream flow that most Albertans are dependent on. And so this is a Bow River Waterscape poster that was designed by an wonderful NRCan artist. And so Bob has shown that there's precipitation in the mountains. And honestly, we don't have a great sense of how much is rain and how much is snow or snow water equivalent here. We have a handful of stations in the Bow River Basin Council that we've been looking at quite closely, varies from 30% as rain to 70% as rain. And so this rain and snow goes into the subsurface and out through in southern Alberta, mainly the Oldman River. And you'll see that NRCan put here a few decades ago that was 80% snowmelt and 20% rain, groundwater, and glacial melt. And so our group, in particular, Eowyn Campbell, has done some fabulous work on the Elbow River, and she actually found that 66% of the water that leaves the mountains was most recently groundwater, and only 33% of it was what we call interflow, which most of it probably spent a short time in the subsurface, but it's got very low solutes. So only a third of it actually comes from rain, glacier, and snowmelt, or about a third of it, sorry. And so here's a map of the population reliant on groundwater. I'll talk a bit more about that. We don't really have a good handle on how many people rely on groundwater, but it is the sole household water supply for something like 30% of Canadians on average. And I'll show you some data coming up here, estimated 20 to 20% of Albertans, depending on which year and which citation you look at. If you look at the literature broadly, so I just told you that more than 60% of Calgary's rivers are supplied by most recently groundwater. The literature at large says that groundwater supplies 20 to 80% of lakes and rivers. So in the water cycle, before it became lake water or river water, it was most recently groundwater. And most of Albertans rely on river water, and all of that river water is groundwater, essentially, in the overwinter period when there's no significant precipitation feeding the rivers. Groundwater is also critical to fish habitat. It moderates temperatures. Fish like to lay their eggs where there is groundwater discharge into the river. And a big issue about groundwater is that it's out of sight and out of mind. And I'll add to that it's complex. So when we look at Jeff's, he's going to show us, I think, some water levels with time in Alberta, in southern Alberta. There's no guarantee that they're all trending the same way, even though they're in the same region. And, broadly speaking, groundwater enters the subsurface and is recharged from precipitation or rain or snowmelt, and it flows really quite slowly through the subsurface. So a super fast groundwater flow would be a meter a day, and some of the groundwater that is pumped out of domestic wells in southern Alberta, I'm willing to wager is century or millennia old, although we don't do age dating analyses, so we don't really know that. And we tap groundwater by drilling wells, if we're lucky, like in the Milk River aquifer historically, more so than at present. The wells will be artesian because the water's fed from a water table that's higher than the ground surface. And there's different kinds of aquifers, so they could be unconsolidated or sediment or sand and gravel, or they could be different kinds of rocks with fracture or other porosity. So here's the data that I was able to find on Albertans' dependence on groundwater. And honestly, I think the very best citation is Hess et al. In 1981. So he combined the number of people living in communities that are dependent on groundwater with the number of rural people, and and he used Statistics Canada data. And really the only assumption he made was that some fraction of rural people on farms or individual homes relied on well water. And then if you go up through Environment Canada, there's a couple of them here. I couldn't find the original one for this, but somewhere from 27 to 23 to 21% are reported to rely on groundwater. And the Alberta website says that more than 600,000 rural Albertans, I'm not quite sure what that definition is, and whether it includes people in villages and towns and hamlets, are groundwater dependent. And in general, I think it's fair to say that most rural Albertans, and I nominally put more than 90% here, rely on water wells, and only people who rely on water wells know how critical that water supply is. In particular, people who've had a problem with their water well and been without water. I feel like this kind of a project is well deserved because I don't think that they get enough attention. They do get attention. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then I just listed, recently there was a publication that split the water supply of different communities in Alberta up. And I've listed here the towns, villages, and other locations in southern Alberta that are groundwater dependent. So all of these communities rely on groundwater wells, and I put a few that are partially groundwater dependent. So they either use groundwaters and lakes or groundwater and rivers. And so I mentioned that Alberta has been giving attention to groundwater users or people who are reliant on groundwater. I'll talk in a few moments about the coal bed methane. Another difference that the coal bed methane concerns for water wells initiated, but one was the working well program. So if you are a person who relies on a groundwater well or a water well, and you haven't been to a working well workshop or you haven't looked at the literature, I really encourage you to do that. And this concern over CBM impacts, coal bed methane impacts on water wells, started this program, which is working to ensure safe and secure groundwater supplies for water well users in Alberta. And you don't really get to see down a well unless you're a geek like me and you put cameras down wells to look at them. It's not very exciting. But, at the surface, you just see that what we call a stick up, which is a cap to keep rodents from going down, and then a little connection here that goes to the pitless adapter, which is there so that you don't have to have a well pit, which can collect air without oxygen. And if you go down into a well pit, it's sometimes not very good for you. Well, people die in well pits, honestly. And the pitless adapter then is where the electrical supply goes to the house. And then there's a submersible pump that goes into the screen of the well or the bottom of the well or just above the screen of the well. And the water's pumped up through a pipeline and it goes along with the electrical to the house. And so Living Lakes is monitoring the water level here, which means that, the old-fashioned way to do it is that you stand at the surface and you drop a piece of tape down or wire down. And when it's got wires that connect to a battery, that's being held in the water level tape by the person at the surface. When it hits the water level, it beeps and a light goes on. And you use that tape to measure how deep your water level is. And then if you keep going down, there's a screen which can be either manufactured or slotted just by using a hacksaw or something equivalent to that. And outside the well is an annulus, and in the best of all worlds, an annulus is backfilled with some kind of low permeability material like clay, or bentonite is a kind of clay that we purchase to put down the annulus. And the purpose of that is so that the water from the surface, which if you live on a farm might have manure in it, for instance, doesn't run down this preferential pathway and right into your screen. And honestly, in Alberta, there's a really wide variety of wells. Some are older, some are newer, and the regulations have changed over the time. So if your well is particularly old, then you, for instance, might not have a good seal around the annulus. And this is just another picture of what a well looks like in the subsurface. They can be, I would say, between 10 and 150 meters. There's not really an average, but kind of a distribution between those numbers. And then the pipe goes into the house underground, and it goes into a pressure tank. And the pressure tank is what you hear when you use a lot of water in your house. It will kick on, and it kicks on because inside the pressure tank, there's halfway somewhere along the length of that pressure tank, there's like a balloon. And when there's not enough water in the tank, then it will pump air into the balloon and push against it, push against the water and increase the pressure in the water. And so if you're in a house where the pressure tank kicks on a lot, so I used to go to a family cottage that the pressure tank would kick on way too often, that probably means that your well is not producing water anymore, and you should consider either getting a driller in to renovate it. That's not the right word. To refurbish it. That's still not the right word, or to drill a different well, and likely possibly a deeper well. And the first part is because the reason that you need to, anybody can put in the chat what the right word is for this. Often if you have water that doesn't have very much oxygen and it flows in the screen, the well pumps, and when the well pumps, the water level goes up and down and it mixes air into it. Then often you'll have bacteria that will oxidize some natural constituents like iron, and then it will crust up the screen. So the driller will put down something to dissolve the iron, perhaps, for instance. Okay, so we have nationally a program that monitors, that's most often a partnership between provinces and territories and the federal government, and it monitors more than 2,200 locations for river flow. And there's also a network of river water quality and sampling. And so there's a historic record that goes back, in the case of Banff, to 1911, which I think might be the oldest monitoring station. But nationally, we don't really have a network. And we just saw from Maggie that the number of groundwater monitoring wells in Alberta compared to BC and Manitoba. And I had a group of 6 graduate students do a group project last winter, and they concluded that Alberta's groundwater monitoring network was one of the better networks in the country. So I think it was in the top 3 or 4 in terms of how many wells there are and how frequently that they are monitored. But groundwater doesn't respect boundaries. And the more data we have and the more integrated the data, the better. And so I am being quite vocal, along with the committee, with the Canadian chapter of the International Association of Hydrogeologists, of which the co-chair, Cynthia McLean, is joining us today. Quite vocal about the fact that we need national attention to groundwater to connect provinces and territories and to do things in the same way so that we have interoperable, or we can compare and contrast. And the US has quite a good national groundwater monitoring network. There's not even a map of Canada's. And the New York Times did a series of articles that Cynthia was really good about posting up on LinkedIn, so I would notice them. And it's not good. It's not looking good at all in the US. And we could have a similar situation. And I think it's fair to say that we don't really have a good idea. We all heard a lot about drought in the spring, and we didn't hear very much about groundwater drought. The province is taking action, and I'm glad that they are. And the more action, the better. And BC, you know, they're having similar crises in different areas as well. Okay, I want to make a really important distinction here between water distribution and water resource. And so if you live in a town or a city, then your municipal government is responsible to distribute your water. And that's the water distribution system. So the pipe that broke in Calgary, which there's a picture of it here, I should have put from CBC, that's the city's responsibility and the city's problem. That's the distribution system. But if the water stopped flowing in the Bow River, which supplies that pipe, then that's the province's problem. The groundwater resource is owned by the province. And so in rural areas, the groundwater well is the responsibility of the water user, the groundwater user. And so if your residence relies on a well and you own the property, then that is your responsibility. But the groundwater resource is also owned by the province. So Alberta has a role here to consider groundwater resources, or to manage and evaluate groundwater resources. And the federal government has a role in the case of First Nation communities. Okay, so how do you go about getting a groundwater supply? I had to take the picture of this drill rig, which was drilling. It's a cable tool rig, and it's drilling a well for geothermal heat in a new region of Canmore that Dave and I just happened upon when we were walking the other night. And I actually talked to a driller's helper in Golden last summer who was coming out to do that. So this is the cable tool rig. You'd have a hard time finding one right now. But the way that you find, homeowners usually find and exploit groundwater for a water supply is by hiring a water well driller. And the water well drillers is regulated by the province. And so they need to have approval under the Water Act, and that's through the Alberta Apprenticeship and Industry Training Program. So you would call up a water well driller, and they would come out and look at your property and point to a part of the ground where they thought you should drill the well. And they may or may not use some of the resources that I'm going to tell you about next. They usually charge by the depth, so the deeper they drill, the more they charge. And as they drill, they normally use different approaches to figure out how much water is coming out of the drill rig. And then they will tell you when they're at they think a sufficient depth. And that amount of water depends on the average household use, and then there's a safety factor for whether or not you're going to have a big party at your house and you need to have a lot of water supply. May or may not consider whether you have swimming pools or hot tubs that you fill, etc. And the most frequent time that somebody calls a driller is because their well's not working. So maybe the pump stopped working and they just need to have the pump pulled and replaced. Or maybe they aren't getting enough water supply and they can't hold pressure in the pressure tank. Or you have a new property and you need a new water supply. And so there's standards that are in place for constructing wells at the bottom left here. That's the design and construction. So the yield testing, yield is how much water comes out, the installation of the pump and equipment, and they need to be disinfected. And then if you are walking away from a property or a well, by the Water Act, they need to be legally closed so that they don't provide superhighways for surface water to make it down to groundwater. And okay, a little bit about the resource in Alberta. So I explained to you that most of the water comes from the Rocky Mountains, recharges into the Rocky Mountains, and then goes into the subsurface. Some of it can be very old. And this is just a picture of hydrogeological regions of Alberta that you can, that is provided or put together as one of those stories, kind of a story. You click on different things and it tells you about different things. That's put together by Alberta Geological Survey and Alberta Energy Regulator. And so the regions they have here are mountains and foothills, which there aren't very many wells in because there's not very many people living there in the Rocky Mountains anyway. And then the second one here is the Western Plains and Benchlands. And then the third one is the Central Plains. And I think that the organizing team will share the URL here afterwards. And we actually know quite a bit about our subsurface thanks to the oil and gas drilling history that we have, which has really mapped the formations. But mostly the formations in the deeper subsurface are often, and not quite at a scale, because that's where the oil and gas is, in the deeper subsurface, not quite at a scale that's shallow enough or useful for groundwater. Nonetheless, this is a great diagram, and it shows aquifers in light blue here. And so we kind of start in southern Alberta at the Porcupine Hills, which is a mixed aquifer, aquitard, and then the one that's really marked as an aquifer is the lower Belly River, or the foremost, which is often too deep to be a reasonable source for groundwater. And this is here is a cross section going from the mountains out to Alberta, and you can see that that the groundwater flow. So it's a little bit complicated and a little bit controversial, but the glacial unloading and erosional unloading has caused a flow reversal under the mountains. But in general, the groundwater flows upwards along these formations, the permeable formations, towards the east. And this is the report that Shannon mentioned earlier, which Joan Rodvang led, and it shows water wells that were sampled for this study of nitrate in the Fort McLeod area. And you can see that she's got till, oxidized and reduced at the top, and then this layer of sand and gravel, which some wells are finished in that, and then bedrock down below. And you can see that most of the wells went down to the bedrock. It's hard to say why, since we weren't there when the driller made that decision. And some of them are finished in the sands and gravels. There's a very special aquifer in Milk River, and I say special because it is transboundary, so it's received arguably more attention than all of the other aquifers put together. It's not very often you get to look at an outcrop of an aquifer, but here's a nice picture of the Milk River aquifer here. And the reason that it has received so much attention is that it's what we call a transboundary aquifer. It flows from southern U.S. northern U.S. into Alberta, along with the Milk River, which is also having a special time right now. And then one other water source that I think, if you pardon the pun, flies under the radar is something called buried valley aquifers. So these are pre-glacial. They're underneath glacial deposits from the last glaciation. And so they would have been rivers that carved into the bedrock and left gravel. So it would be like if we filled up the Oldman River Salweg, or where the Oldman River flows, if we filled it up on top of it with glacial till, etc. This is from the Edmonton area, from colleagues from University of Alberta. But here's a 1971 picture of pre-glacial gravels in southern Alberta. And I can't see it very well on this screen, but Lethbridge is right here. And the biggest Blackfoot Reserve is right here. And then one other expression of groundwater that you may or may not have on your rural property are springs. So when springs come up, they were subsurface, they become subsurface. So they are groundwater springs. And here's a lovely paper done by Abe Springer. What a great name for somebody who studies spring, and colleagues at the University of Lethbridge on southern Alberta springs. And okay, so now I'm going to give you a few thoughts about how you can find out about groundwater in your area. The number one thing that environmental consultants and researchers alike go to is the Alberta Water Well Information Database. And if you just put those words into your search line of Google, you'll find it, no problem. It is information from water well drillers. So when they drill your well, according to regulation, they have to submit a water well report. And so that water well report is available publicly. And, historically, some of the wells are quite old, decades old, and don't have great water well reports, but progressively they get better and better. And I'll show you an example of one in a moment. At any rate, you can go into their interactive portal, their map, and every time you see an orange dot, you can click on it and it will tell you who the owner is, what the legal land description is, how deep it is, when it was drilled. So this one was drilled in 1967, 902 meters elevation. And then you can click on the water well drilling report and you'll get something that looks like this. So I tried to find the Lethbridge College agricultural farm water well drilling report. I don't know if I was successful, but this is kind of what you'll often find. So it's got a GIC, Groundwater Information Center well ID. That's a unique well identifier. It tells you where it's located. And then the important thing is that it's got this information about what the driller reported in the subsurface. So a bit of a caution: drillers are tradespeople, and they have great experiential information, but they don't have the kind of geology that, let's say, an oil and gas geology experience or training that, let's say, an oil and gas geologist or log would have. And so here they found topsoil to 20 meters, clay to 195 meters, shale to 225 meters. So you can see what's under the ground there. And it looks to me like they decided to complete in this sandstone. And even also important, you can see where they completed if the water well record is complete by the screen depth information, which is down here. So lots of information here. In the same database, there's also baseline water well test reports, which were instituted after the coal bed methane water well interference issue. And so if a company wants to exploit for CBM, legally they have to go to residents around the well and offer to test their groundwater quality. And there's not very much CBM exploration anymore, but companies tend to do this as a best practice. And in this case, you can see that you get a major ion report of the water from your well. So there aren't that many of these in southern Alberta because it wasn't an area of significant CBM exploration, but still something to be aware of if you ever see those pink diamonds. And one other source is Alberta Environmental Public Health Information Network. And you'll see on the next slide that if you have a private well that you are using to supply your water, that you can bring a test in to the local public health lab twice a year and get it tested, get your well tested for some parameters. And this is a southwestern Alberta area. Here you see Lethbridge here. And so you can see here's total dissolved solids, which is basically how many dissolved ions. And these arrows are the standards for each of these parameters. All of these standards are aesthetic parameters, so it's perfectly fine as long as you don't mind the taste of the water to drink water that's got more than 500 milligrams per liter total dissolved solids. And here is sodium, which used to have a health standard but doesn't anymore. So it's taste, more than 500 milligrams per liter. It could taste salty. Chloride, same aesthetic objective purpose. It tastes salty if it's above that. Iron, which it has no public health concern but stains toilets, sinks, and bathtubs. And then sulfate, which has an aesthetic objective. And actually, if you aren't used to drinking sulfate-rich water, then it will cause you to have diarrhea. But if your stomach or your gut becomes accustomed to it, then it's no longer a problem. And then here's well depth, which I mentioned earlier. So this goes from 0 to 50, 100. It's kind of small, but you can see that well depth goes from maybe 10 meters to 150 meters or something like that. And then they can show you a map of the parameters and what they look like. And so the water well changes seasonally. So most of the water level in everywhere in Canada usually goes up in the springtime when there's recharge because of snow melt, and also because May and June tend to be our rainiest months. There's more groundwater recharge. And so the total dissolved solids in shallow wells will go up and down as well. And here's a kind of a snapshot by Watershed, and here's the Oldman River. And so you can see that the total dissolved solids, which is kind of a bulk water quality parameter, that it is as good in the Oldman River for groundwater as anywhere. Better than Battle River, for instance, on average. And then just a couple of notes here that in Alberta, if you live in a town or a city, your town or city is sampling your water, and you can find their reports and testing it. But if you have a private well, then you can take your well to Alberta Health Services twice a year, and they will do a test for pathogen indicators, which could be bacteria and viruses, and some of the ions that might be dissolved in it. And I really strongly encourage everybody to do that. Okay, another way you can find out about groundwater in your area is our gown, which Jeff will talk about next. And then the other thing you can do is become a citizen scientist. So you could empower yourself to monitor your own well levels in addition to taking a sample twice a year to the health lab. And so to recap, I want you to remember that groundwater is 98% of unfrozen, this should say, fresh water on Earth. It's stored and released from aquifers, supplies much of surface water in rivers and lakes. It's a household water supply for about 30% of Canadians, and slightly less than that, I think, but not well constrained number of Albertans. It's critical to fish habitat. It deserves to be considered across Canada by integrating the provinces and territories and in partnership with the feds, I think. And the groundwater is owned and managed by the province of Alberta, but users are responsible for the distribution system. And in closing, I really encourage you to take an active role in understanding your groundwater supply if you have one. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cathy. That was a really interesting overview and a little scary here and there, but I liked how you ended with the solution that we can take charge and get involved and make things better. So thank you. Please put your questions in the chat or prepare for the Q&A coming up soon. We have one more presentation. So it's going to be focused a bit more on the Oldman Watershed, so our local information from Jeff Gutsell. He's the regional hydrogeologist with Alberta Environment and Protected Areas. He's also on the technical committee for the project and has really been helping us for many years. He's kind of our go-to groundwater expert in these parts and was part of some of the previous studies as well. So thank you very much, Jeff, for all of your support over the years and always being willing to help out. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, so I'll share the screen here and make sure everything's working out here. Is everybody seeing that? Is that good, Shannon?
I'm not seeing it
Not
yet.
seeing it yet? Okay. Try this again. How about
There we go.
that? Okay. Technology, wonderful. It works. There we go. Okay, finally. Must have slow internet connection here. So thank you to Shannon for a wonderful introduction, and thank you to Cathy for an excellent overview of groundwater in Alberta and what it is, where it comes from, and what we can do to learn about it and manage and protect it. I'm going to focus, like Shannon said, a little more directly on the Oldman River Watershed and specifically the Alberta Groundwater Observation Network. So here's a quick outline of topics we'll cover. What's the network? The monitoring wells in Alberta. I'll give you a quick demo of our groundwater website and things you can get off of it and understand from it. Then we'll go into specifics for the Oldman Watershed. I'll take you through some groundwater stations with water level data. Others have chemistry data. And then we'll finalize the talk with a little summary and some current challenges and opportunities moving forward with groundwater in Alberta. So, like I described before, the GOWN, as it's called, the Alberta Groundwater Observation Well Network. Historically, it started to operate about the 1950s with Alberta Research Council putting in many of these wells. In around 1982, the council transferred at the time about 160 of these wells to Alberta Environment. There's been different periods during that time that we've done certain things. In 1985 to 97, we did a lot of high quality water sampling for the program. And then unfortunately around 97 to 2006, sampling was cut back in regards to cutbacks and money issues. You can see on the right hand side here on this figure, this is basically showing what we have for the number of water wells and the years they're put in. You can see how we've increased the monitoring water wells in our network over the years. So what about our current operations? So currently in Alberta, we have roughly about 1,100 groundwater wells, monitoring wells we operate. You can see this, they're shown on the map here. The orange circles are the ones that show quantity, and the gray triangles are the ones that show us the quantity and quality. So as you can probably glean from this, you can see that the large or the vast majority of these wells are centered in southern and central Alberta. And of this network, they're composed and completed in different types of aquifers. Some are superficial, some are bedrock. As Cathy described, the differences, some are unconfined, some are confined. So out of these about 1,100, currently we monitor about 304 of them actively. And of those 304, 216 have pressure transducers or automatic water measuring devices put down them. And technicians go out and monitor those usually once a year. The remaining 57 or so are monitored using real-time or near-time geostationary operational environmental satellites, or GEOS for short. And those are recorded and transmitted hourly. So, and the final one, 31, are ones that are manually dipped, which Maggie and Cathy showed photos of people dipping with the water tapes. So what do we collect from these groundwater wells? So we collect water levels in 218 of the active sites, water chemistry from about 148 of these sites since approximately 2007. And of the wells that are out there active and non-active, 437 chemistry wells are used to collect various parameters to monitor, and that some of which include routine and major ions. Again, I think Cathy showed a good diagram of that, but some of those would include total dissolved solids, turbidity, pH, sulfate, for examples. Other things are trace elements. Those are more like metals and that, like copper, iron, arsenic, manganese. Organics that are in usually total organic carbon and other things that are measured in those various isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen, pesticides, herbicides, bacteria, total coliforms, fecal coliforms. These are measured in the wells. So what about the GOWN network in Alberta? Well, in Alberta, the maintenance, organization, supply, documentation, all the good work is done by technicians in the Airshed and Watershed Stewardship Branch of the Resource and Stewardship Division of Alberta Environment Protected Areas. Here I'm just showing a few slides of examples of work and instruments in the field. You can see in various of these, you got our computers with the collection devices and the wells and other electronic equipment such as water tapes and gas meter detections and that. Over here, again, we have these real or near-time monitoring sites. We have our various equipment and trucks that go out and monitor and collect all these, and some of the happy staff that come out and do all this wonderful work for us so we can come and look at all the data afterwards. So here quickly again is some examples in the Milk River watershed that have Milk River. Here's a geostation, and here's one near Sundre, Alberta. Other examples of wells in the Kananaskis area, we have this one here in a nice culvert that's above ground, because it apparently the water level is probably above the surface, so it's will be a flowing artesian well, much like the X-Shell example over here on the right. We've got a continuous monitoring site and it's flowing. We have a metering stick here to show the level of the water above the actual ground surface. So that pressure pushes water up above ground surface, causing this flowing artesian conditions. So our gown network. So hopefully this will work. And I'm going to show you an example of our gown website and take you through a quick examples of what we have for it. There you go. Just drag this over so everyone can see that. Can everybody see that screen, or can we see that, Shannon? Just want to make sure we're good.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so here is what you'd see. And like I said, on the screen, I have a QR code you can scan out, take you directly to the site. But I believe Shannon or Maggie, someone has put the actual web link in our chat for going to that. So this is what you see when you go into the site. So right at the top, there's active wells and they're inactive wells. So you can toggle between either one of those and see what's going on here, and it shows you on the map. So I'm going to stick with the active wells here. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there's data type. So in here, you can go in and it mirrors what's at the bottom here, continuous loggers, like we talked about the data loggers in the previous slides, manual dip and near real, the geostations. So you can go in if you want, and you want to pick, for example, let me see all the near real sites. We'll take those off and we just want continuous data. So that can show you, and you click on and off all the various sites that you want to look at, for example. So as you can see with this too, you can zoom in and out and look at the various sites. If you hover over them, they'll tell you the site name and various other informations. Some of these you can see have multiple stations on them. So you'd have to go into those to be a little more precise, see what you want. On the right-hand side here, you can search by station name, and I'll show you where you can find those stations names in a second. You can also zoom in and out by these buttons. This home screen will take you back to the center. It'll centralize it on Alberta where the sites are. And then finally, if you want here on this layer manager, you can click on the labels tab, which will throw on the labels of all the sites, although it gets a little clutters, but that's where you'd get your names and that to put into the stations. So we turn that off. So now you'll also notice in the middle of the screen, there's map view and there's table view. So in the table view, if we click on that, you'll see all the table names and station numbers, the gown number. Last time there was a sample measured in water levels, depth, and if water quality sample was taken at those sites. So also on this thing, you can click on each of these sites. So if I click on, for example, the Barron site, it's going to take me to that location. It's going to show you a nice little map of where it is in relation to in the province here, just northwest of Lethbridge here. It provides you an overview of a number of things: station name, its water well identifier, as Cathy described on the Alberta Water Well database. That's what you have. Tells you the basins in, aquifer types, elevations, a lot of good stuff if you want to look at that. One of the things, like Cathy described here too, and you can click on this and it will bring up the water well log from our database. So you can see what each of these water wells, monitoring wells, is completed in. And I won't do that because Cathy went through a nice description of a water well example there. But also on the left here, see it's the station name. So you have this, and you can click down on water levels. So if you click that, it'll show you water levels for this station. And you can either have 3 years, last 3 years, or all the data. So with that, you do all the data. For some of the sites, it gets kind of complex. So you can go down to the bottom and filter out what you want. So we've got 3 things you can look at: water levels, the mean daily, historical mean, max, and historical mean. So if you see, I click off and just go to the mean daily water levels, it's much cleaner, and you can see for that data set what's going on in this example. And also, which is nice, if you hover over the screen and you can see, it'll give you for that point on the chart, the mean water level at that point. You can see going there. So also some interesting features you can have here. You can also go to our download screen, which will allow you to download to various formats, Excel of that, the 3 years complete and this complete high resolution data sets. So that in itself, oh, and another quick little thing, if you're really interested and excited about that site, you can click on the star mark here and it'll add it to your favorite set. And then when you go onto your favorites, it'll click on that site for you. So there in itself is a quick overview of our GOWN network and how you can pull some data off or look for various sites that you may have interest in. So now I'll continue with the rest of my presentation. So what about specifically the GOWN network in Oldman River Watershed? Well, what do we know here? So in blue is outlined the Oldman Watershed. And you can see the green dots are all our active GOWN locations in the basin. So I guess one of the first things you'll notice with this is there isn't a lot of GOWN wells in this basin, and a number of them are associated with a lot of our infrastructures, such as our Oldman Dam, Waterton Dam, Kehoe Lake and Reservoir, and Pine Coulee thing. So I guess take home with this is we have a number of good sites, but we don't have a lot of them in Oldman Watershed in particular. So of these, what do we have? So we have 15 total active GOWN sites in our watershed, 7 of these continuous data loggers, 7 near real time. Those are the GEOS ones again, and 1 manually dipped. And what are these wells? Well, the majority of them are superficial sand and gravel wells. Of these, 6 to 8 are approximately superficial wells that appear to be located in buried channels. Again, Cathy gave us a nice overview of what buried channels are. Basically old river channels that were buried under glacial sediments after the ice age came through the area. And then finally, only one of the sites that I looked at is predominantly would be in a bedrock, and that was in a sandstone. That's our barren site. And again, we have a variety of, the settings of confined versus unconfined. However, most of the wells we're looking at are in confined aquifers, 13 of the 15. So what does the GOWN water wells show us particularly? And now we'll go through some water well sites in particular. So what I'll take you through on each of these slides, they'll be very similar, but what I'll have is on the left-hand side, we'll have the GOWN site from what you saw from my demonstration from the GOWN network, the site location station with all information. The middle part will be the well log from that GOWN well. And then to the far right, we'll have the water level data from that water well. So this will be typical in all the slides I'll take you through here. So all this data, like I said, is available on our GOWN network and website that I showed you. A lot of the things you'll see in the data, we'll talk, and Cathy talked about this too. Stole a lot of my thunder here, but thanks to that, Cathy. She shows you too, like we've seen a lot of these cyclicity or annual recharge and then decrease of the water levels in these wells. You see that prevalent in a lot of the water wells I'll show you here. So this well, for example, is the Carmen Gay West well. It's a shallow well and superficial sand and gravels, and it's unconfined. So what we see here, well, the general trend here, and the actual data we have is not that long. It's about 4 or 5 years. The general trend overall is decreasing water levels. So what could that mean? At a high level, you can interpret that potentially during a period of this near the end portion 21 onwards, we've been in a drier or drought period. So we can interpret perhaps that is what is causing a decrease in this water level in this well station. However, I want to caveat that we have to be careful with drawing certain assumptions with this, because there's lots of other explanations of why the water level could be going down, some of which include natural variability or overuse. There could be a lot of wells that people use in this area that are next to or in close proximity to our monitoring well, and that is drawing water levels down. So just be cautious whenever you're interpreting or looking at this data, that there could be a lot of answers or rationale reasons why water level looks like it's falling. So I also wanted to make aware that with these wells, we have to be careful too to understand that, depending on the depth of the aquifer, the type of aquifer, confined versus unconfined, and where the recharge source is, be it the Rocky Mountains or in the vicinity of this well, will affect and determine how fast these water levels respond over time. And then again, as Cathy showed us in our nice shot of the water cycle, all groundwater recharge from surface. So if we see, like we're currently seeing in the last few years here, decreased rainfall, water levels, snow melt is occurring at different times, and that reduced snowpacks, ultimately droughts, that this will have an impact over varying scales on the aquifers and subsequently on the water levels we see in these water wells. So again, a little bit of caution to think it depends on where these are recharged and how long. Like Cathy explained, that this water, if it's recharged from the mountains, could take many years or tens of years to actually reach our wells type thing and recharge these things. So just be cautious, and again, drawing conclusions from a lot of this data when we don't have all the information. So we'll move on to a few more slides here. So we got the Barron site. This is a shallow well again. This one's in bedrock, it's confined. And we'll notice on this one that we've got water level increases and decreases of in the range of 2 to 4 meters. So that's quite a bit different than we saw in the last one that had, like, I think it was 10 to 20 centimeters of movement. But again, here I've put on here that we could potentially relate some of these water level decreases to 1980 drought phase that went through in here. But again, cautious with drawing conclusions on a little bit of data. Again, drought related, and the end part could be again related to our recent dry and drought period that we've seen. Orton Aquifer, like was described by Cathy and I think Maggie and her things, there's been a lot of studies done on this aquifer. This is an important aquifer just east of Fort McLeod here. A lot of people use it, and it's been shown, or a lot of studies been done on it for nitrates. I know the Oldman Watershed Council did a study and was part of with Cathy on that with nitrates, isotope work we've done on this. So this is a superficial sand and gravel aquifer. It is confined in most of the areas. And in this one, you can see the overall trend we see over the pretty long thing here. We probably go 40 or so years, is again decreasing. And again, like you see in these things, a lot of these things, like I said, the cyclicity and the yearly up and down trends in the water levels. So what about another one? We got Kehoe Lake, a little farther to the west here. This is intermediate well. This is in a buried valley. Again, described by Cathy in her talk. These buried valleys, and they're quite important sources for aquifers and water in many parts of the province here. So what does this show? So this one, overall trend is showing a 5-meter increase approximately over the years we've had here, about 40 years of record. and it's continually gone up. Don't know exactly if that's related to anything in particular, recharge from certain things, but we need some more information on that. Mud Lake, similar area, intermediate to deep well, superficial gravel is confined, 2 to 3 meter increases and decreases we see. It's kind of varied all over the board here, depending, but again, you may be able to infer certain parts that drought related to the water levels falling or rising. Oldman Dam, very short record here, superficial unconfined aquifer, much less variation of 20 to 40 centimeters, decreasing trend. But again, take that for what it's worth. We only have about 2 or 3 years of water level data for this one. McNally, close just south by the airport here. Deep well, this is in pre-glacial sands and gravels. Cathy had a nice slide there of the ancient pre-glacial valleys. So this pre-glacial Saskatchewan sand and gravels was a gravel that was laid down in these pre-glacial valleys, much like you see today is being laid down in the Oldman River and then subsequently buried by glaciation. So this is confined aquifer, quite a long record again, but again, we see decreasing water levels, perhaps related in the area again, 1980 drought time. And then following that, we've had increases for the rest of the data we have. And finally, Enchant Well, this is a deep well again, confined aquifer. Overall trend we see is increased 5 to 6 meters of change for the record we have here. So that's the water level we have. What about water chemistry data? Well, quick overview slide here. Just what you should get out of this slide, I guess, is just similar to the groundwater cycle slide that was shown Cathy's presentation. We have, different means of which water gets into the ground, becomes groundwater. And you can see water will go down, hit the water table. Water table is the level below which everything is saturated with water. So you can have the flow paths the water takes. It could be days into a river, or it could be years, could be centuries, or even millennia. And it goes through different substrates and minerals and sediments, going through confining layers, unconfined layers, and goes through that. So basically, this is basically just showing the different paths that water can follow in the subsurface. So what I want you to get out of this is that, the longer that water spends and travels through the subsurface, the more time it has to make contact with various media like sediments and mineralogy and pick up different qualities of the minerals and sediments that are in this water, and various other biogeochemical reactions can happen. So again, longer time that the water spends in the underground area, the greater change that will occur with it. And what I'm going to show you at the bottom here, then in subsequent slides, is I want to show you, or just give you an overview of when the water travels to the groundwater, and you can measure in the chemistry of water here, anions, which are negatively charged ions in the groundwater, we can measure. So certain of these we can describe and look at to describe age of groundwater. So if we look, this formula here for bicarbonate, that is usually anions that show this would be very young new water. So we'd see very recent and very slow and little bit of travel time in the groundwater. As you move through the groundwater and it goes through deeper and deeper levels, you'll get into more bicarbonate and sulfate rich water types, and then finally into chloride rich water types, where you may get into these deeper century and millennium type water thing. So basically, I'm just showing you there the change in anion water types over time with the flow paths of the water through the ground. And then in this slide, we have a Piper plot, which is one of the various methods we can use to show the concentrations of variant. It's anions, again, negative, and cations, positive charged atoms. So we can display it, the chemistry of those, on these Piper plots. And then on the right here, I've got one by Fetter here, example of the water types you can break these water samples into and describe them as you plot them here. So what we're going to be able to do is be able to compare various water types from various samples here, compare, say, these ones as compared to these ones up here. So you can compare various water chemistries and samples and see where the similarities and differences are. So we have a little bit of information here. So we have some chemistry data, and we actually have a lot of chemistry data from the water wells we've collected, although we just haven't had a lot of time to go through this. So I'm giving a quick overview of very high level stuff that we can see out of some of these stuff. So out of the active superficial ground wells that I've looked at for the Oldman Watershed, what we can see is, you see on the anion triangle here, that clusters in the bicarbonate and sulfate type areas. So bicarbonate, like I said before, is indicative generally of younger, less traveled water, or sulfate waters are further traveled and deeper flow paths that had, again, more chance to interact with the minerals of the subsurface. So what we see in this one, for example, that well number 263, which is shown on here, the orange triangles near the bottom, is in the bicarbonate triangle water type here. So this is younger water, like I said, a lower chemical evolution, fairly young, and it matches up well with the well description because it's a shallow superficial gravel well. So that matches up well, and we have good correlation. Subsequently, or conversely, wells 109, 278, and 279, shown up here in the purple triangles and the blue squares, are in the sulfate, or plot in the sulfate type area for the water chemistry, water type. And these, again, they are sands and gravel superficial materials, but they're deeper, and they're what we would expect from deeper waters, more sulfate rich type. So again, they seem to match up well, the chemistry and the well descriptions. And then finally, I have very few from bedrock wells, because we show we have very few bedrock wells in the Oldman Watershed. So again, the plot here of the one we see in the sulfate type, this station here in particular, is sulfate rich, indicative of older waters, greater flow paths, what we would generally expect from bedrock wells. So like I said, the chemistry and the wall logs are matching up well and showing us good correlation. So overall, what do we know and have from our groundwater water well network, specific for the Oldman Watershed? So we can see in all the water wells, whether they're deep, superficial, bedrock, confined, unconfined, that water levels change to various degrees over time. Most of the water well logs I showed you will show this annual cyclicity, or repetition of patterns of recharge and discharge, or rising and decreasing water levels in the patterns. The increase and decreases in the Oldman Watershed have ranged from about 40 centimeters to 6 meters. So quite a big range. We can, or I've interpreted in this that some of these decreases could be related to drought cycles, and that in the 80s, 2000s, and present 2021 onwards. Chemistry data, like I said, is numerous, and we need to do a lot of further analysis to determine, trends, not only at single station, but between stations and within the basin here. So, and is there similar differences between the bedrock wells and other bedrock wells or sufficient bedrock wells, shallow versus deep. So there's a lot more information here we can glean and determine from that. But like I showed you, my initial very limited review of the data shows that shallow wells, dominantly the anines are a bicarbonate type of younger water, thus less traveled and shorter flow paths. The deep wells, sulfate type, greater traveled, what we would expect from deeper bedrock wells. So what are our current challenges and opportunities with this network? Well, overall, many of our ground wells are old. Some of the wells that we use are 1950s and they're getting very old. We haven't drilled a new ground well network well since 2012. Like I said, many are old and need to be reclaimed. A number of them, or a lot of them, on private land. We need agreements to be kept to access them. Maintenance, rehabilitation is an ongoing thing that is very costly. And as I think I've shown with the slide, that we lack adequately density and coverage, not only in the Oldman watershed, but across the province. And overall, our current ground well network has been a collection of wells that the government has collected, not just primarily for water level and chemistry data, but for various purposes, some of which are contamination studies and that. So I guess my point here is that the network was never set up specifically for the purpose that we're trying to use it for. It was set up by a collection of wells, and we've used the wells the best we can to glean the data we have. So, and again, I can't emphasize this more. I know Cathy hammered this home, but we have a general lack in the awareness and funding for groundwater related data, information, knowledge, and especially monitoring wells. But the light at the end of the tunnel here, and hopefully there's some good news and opportunities I can show you with. So the drought situation, current thing we're seeing in Alberta, has put a very good focus and highlight groundwater and brought it to the forefront, hopefully, of its importance and, use for an alternative water source in Alberta. In the latest 2024 budget, the government has committed funds over the next 3 years to better understanding water management system and increasing availability for communities and businesses. And this includes funds that can be used for projects for better understanding water availability, aquifer mapping, groundwater surface water actions, and enhancing and expanding our groundwater water well network. So these are great opportunities, and these projects and funds will create opportunities for collaborations with such people like the University of Calgary and Cathy, other government organizations, AGS, Alberta Geologic Survey, watershed councils, as this is with the Oldman Watershed Council, and that to hopefully with this extra funding and research, we'll be able to better understand water availability, aquifer characteristics across the province, and hopefully, make people aware, although again, I'll echo the things of our other presenters that I'm very happy to see the wide interest in that, in this talk of people that are so interested and hopefully excited about groundwater and wanting to know more and to protect this valuable resource. So I'll end there with any questions that may people have, and I'll turn it back over to Shannon to take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. That was really interesting, and how the wells are all so different. Some are increasing, some are decreasing. So yeah, it's a lot to try to manage. So we are almost at 3:30, so please stay if you can, and we will answer your questions. There's quite a few really good questions here and a bit of a discussion happening. So I'm going to jump right in. The first one was from Dan, and he asks, Maggie, it wasn't clear to me what role you see the TTEM technology taking in the program. Is it to help select suitable areas for monitoring of existing wells or to drill new monitoring wells?
Awesome. Thank you for your question, Dan. So we see the TTEM technology being integrated into the project in a couple of different ways. So one of them is we intend to deploy the TTEM technology to conduct some surveys on targeted sites, potentially ones where we see an observation well or a potential observation well, to collect some additional data surrounding the area. This is because we believe that whenever it comes time to potentially, do some analysis of that data, we think that the TTEM data could be really helpful. But in the same breath, using that TTEM on certain areas and providing that data back to the community so that they can see the potentially identified aquifers for more effective drilling locations is also really important. So it'll be used in a couple of different ways, and we're still refining exactly how to make the most out of that innovative technology in the project.
If I
Perfect.
just jump in there, Maggie, I think too with this, the TTEM, we're using it as just one of the tools in our toolbox. It isn't the end all be all, and it won't magically tell us where all the aquifers are and all that. It's just another tool which is we'll put in our toolbox that'll supplement what I think going forward we'll be using. So it's a good tool, but it's not the only tool, I guess, my comment there is.
So true. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. The next one's from Barry. He's asking Jeff if only 304 out of the 1160 gown wells are monitored currently. What is the status of the other wells? Are they maintained?
So that's a good question. Yeah, so like I said, one of my summary slides, that for the most part, the ones that I guess the remaining, like what we said, about 700-800, right, are in various states of either they're monitored irregularly, because you saw in one of my slides I showed that chemistry, we only have I think 306 active wells, but we actually had 418 sites monitoring chemistry. So we do monitor some of the other ones that are not active for chemistry, but like I also explained too, a large majority of them aren't used or in disrepair and need fixing or monitoring, or perhaps we've lost access to the stakeholder engagement on that site type thing. So yeah, it's a very good question. And yeah, unfortunately there's lots of wells out there, but like I said, maintaining them and that is very expensive, and we'd like lots more money to do it. But yeah, as you've pointed out, you can see here we've got lots of wells that are left not utilized potentially to their full extent.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. The next one I think is for Cathy. David's asking, do you know that if the Oldman River sources over the year are similar to what you showed for the Bow River diagram? Has the Oldman been studied that much?
So we don't know that yet, but we intend to get there in a project that we have that is supported primarily by Alberta Innovates, called Integrated Groundwater Surface Water Climate Assessment of the Eastern Slopes of the Rockies Rivers. I think it must be, but we haven't done the work yet, so stay tuned.
Okay, great. Good to hear that's happening. Question from Wendell to Maggie and Jeff. When do you use manual dip tapes and when do you use data loggers? And do you use the hobo type data loggers or the Solinist?
Yeah, so for us, all of our monitoring sites are set up with the continuous data loggers. When we go out and conduct the site visits, we use the manual dip tapes at that time prior to removing the loggers to check the equipment, make sure everything's working effectively. And then in terms of the equipment type, we have used the Hobo MX 2001s at, I think, probably the majority of the sites. But we've also used the Solence at this point, and we are in the process right now of setting up the Solence cloud system for some telemetry sites as well within the Columbia Basin. So we'll probably be exploring that as well once we get to the equipment installation phase here in Alberta.
Okay, does that answer your question, Wendell?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. A question from Michael. Is anybody combining direct well water levels with INSAR data in the Palliser Triangle? Oh my. Interferometric synthetic aperture radar map. Groundwater deformation using Earth's surface that are collected from orbiting satellites. Has anybody heard of this, or is anybody working on that we know of in the Palliser Triangle?
I think I know where the question's coming from, Shannon, but yeah, Savior, help you there yet? No, we're not. We're not looking at that. You know, there is you know, lots of good things we can do, but you know, having the time and the people. So, short answer, no, but a good question or a good thing to think about, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. Question from Michael. Water level history is great, but is the local rainfall data directly linked to seasonal or climatic phases, recognizing that the time to recharge or the distance to recharge does not directly relate to the vertical rainfall at the Gown well?
I can try that one, Shannon. So really good question. And you're right that only the most shallow aquifers, arguably that don't have thick unsaturated zones, would have water levels that respond to individual rainfall events or significant rainfall events. And since much of our surface is covered by glacial till, we don't have very many shallow aquifers with thin unsaturated zones. So Jeff showed the schematic of groundwater flowing down and through kind of horizontally through aquifers, vertically through aquitards. And I think we both alluded to the fact that groundwater can have significant ages. So the deeper aquifers don't respond to individual events. One kind of monitoring well that does is actually wells that are connected to rivers. So in Canmore, there's a well, which is, I want to say it's 75 meters deep. It has groundwater quality that suggests that it's deep groundwater, but it cycles up and down with the Bow River because it's close to the Bow River aquifer, and so it's hydraulically connected at the screen. The pressure of water, because water is so incompressible, goes through really quickly, and it's independent of the groundwater flow. That's probably a little bit more complicated than you wanted for that question, but free of charge.
Perfect, thanks, Cathy. A question from Shirley. Are any of these aquifers, particularly the superficial gravel aquifer sources, considered to be goody or groundwater under the influence of surface water, particularly those linked to the reservoirs?
Wow, that's another good question. We got a lot of good questions coming in. So what we got to understand with goody groundwater under the direct influence, the acronym for that, right? How we view it with the government, I guess, is under there's goody would fall under a PIA, which is the Environment Protection Hansen Act, which is for the quality, where I primarily deal with the Water Act, which is quantity. So although we use similar methodology to look at or determine connectivity between groundwater and surface water, The GUDI, which I think alluded to here, primarily the quality data side of it. I think it's we have a tool to determine, the depth, the type of material it's in for the quality side. But to answer the questions, yeah, a number of these shallow aquifers are connected. I mean, even the one I showed, the Orton, at certain instances, I think to the east, does actually daylight uh, with the Oldman River, I believe, in certain areas. Similar with in the south, the Whiskey Valley Aquifer, talking about Milk River here. It is, a superficial sand and gravel thing, although it's confined, but it again daylights in the Milk River at various points. So, you know, it's a whole, I guess, continuum of things. There is no, I don't know, truly confined aquifer that never is ever affected by anything. Otherwise, it wouldn't be recharged, and it would always be depleted. So, to varying degrees, there is connectivity with our aquifers, and it just again is a scale thing. To is it connected over days, where GUDI gazed a month would be a GUDI well that would be of concern, or is it, millennium type thing that we don't really have a concern with the quality in that thing? So again, very good question, but yes, simple answer is yes. A lot of our aquifers are connected to surface water.
Perfect, thank you. I just have to turn off my camera. It says my internet's unstable and you keep freezing. We have one question left. I know some of it was answered in the chat, but it'd be good to speak to it for everybody. From Cheryl Bradley, who asks, might some of the increase in groundwater levels be due to irrigation water use? And has there been any regional scale studies regarding this and potential implications for river flow? And Cathy, do you want to just speak to what you had added in the chat?
Sure. And, I didn't answer Cheryl's good question. I spoke about water quality. So this is a study that Joan Rodvang, who I had the privilege of working with for over some years, put that she was calculating the groundwater discharge to rivers and concerned about nutrient and salt loading from agricultural operations. The answer to Cheryl's actual question is that irrigators have to monitor their return flows. I know that for a fact. I have never seen, and I actually had a conversation with somebody from an irrigation district last week. I've never seen a compilation of those data or consideration of them. So they irrigate in some areas, there's tile drains. In other areas, there's groundwater discharge to return canals. That goes back normally into the river. And I haven't seen a compilation of the data holistically by Watershed. And I think it's a really good suggestion, Cheryl.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, well, that was the last question. So I just want
Wonder
to,
if I could add to that.
oh, sure, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, it's not on a regional basis, but we have evidence in BC of a water table being influenced by irrigation of a golf course, and it's not publicly documented at this point, but we do have water level increases in the aquifer in October, where it wouldn't be receiving any other source except from the golf course irrigation. So it's a very minor study, but it does indicate that yes, it's certainly possible for the aquifer to be completely influenced by the irrigation.
Oh, thanks, Richard. Very interesting. Okay, so we're just gonna wrap up then, and I just want to thank Maggie and Cathy and Jeff again for their awesome presentations. Hopefully you learned a lot today and got a lot of your questions answered. I want to thank the technical committee and the funders, and especially Living Lakes Canada, who's been really managing the project and doing a great job leading everything. So thank you, our audience, for joining us. Really appreciate your time and sticking with us. I know we're a little bit over, so Appreciate you staying on.